Hello and welcome to our C plus V community talk in partnership with Heritage Months for our Arab American Heritage Months event. My name is Linnea Butler. I'm one of the C plus V graduate fellows. And before we begin, I want to take a moment in the spirit of healing and peace to acknowledge and honor the indigenous peoples of the land upon which University of Denver stands, the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute tribes, to acknowledge that the land where the University of Denver now sits is the ancestral homeland of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes, of those whose loss we both recognize and mourn. Like the history of so many institutions in the American West, ours is complex and sometimes painful. In recognition of this fact and to underscore our commitment to inclusion and equity, we commit to listen to and affirm the stories of all in our community. We are so excited to have you all join us for another celebration. C plus V has had the opportunity for the past few months to partner with Heritage Months as we honor the diverse identities and histories of the DU community. Part of this work has included dialogue, and I'm honored to introduce our moderator today, Netta Kikia, who will get us started.
Hello and salam alaikum, folks. It is so good to see so many faces and names that are recognized in the chat and so many new ones. It is both an honor to be moderating this panel of such esteemed people that I deeply respect. And so we are going to have, as I was telling the group earlier, a great time. So with that being said, excuse me, I woke up and my throat was scratchy today. So we are working with it. But with that being said, we have our panelists here today. So panelists, go on ahead and turn on your cameras and we will get this going. So, so I'm going to just kind of read a little bit about each person. There's quite a bit more to them, of course, than their bios, but one-on-one introduce them all. And then from here, after I introduce folks, we actually had our panelists kind of prepare a little thing for us here today as far as an activity goes. So I'll be sharing some photos alongside that in just a moment. But a little bit of background about who I am first and foremost. My name is Netta Kikia, and I am the DU Dialogues Program Manager at the University of Denver. And that's just one of many roles that I play. But let's talk about our panelists. So first and foremost, Amal Qasir is a Syrian-American international spoken word poet. Amal Qasir is a Syrian-American international spoken word poet who started as a waitress at her family's restaurant in Denver, Colorado. She has performed and taught in 12 countries and cities, all over venues ranging from orphanages to refugee camps, to youth prisons, to churches. Her work is heavily influenced by the war in Syria, her experience as an, quote, other in the United States, and the plight of the oppressed all over the world. She designed her own undergraduate major titled Community Programming and Social Psychology, where she has been able to create programs for a range of causes and people. She currently serves in the field of mental health with Colorado's Muslim Youth for Positive Impact, and in program development and with outreach in the Barrios, Houston. She teaches a free writing workshop every Wednesday on Instagram Live and is finishing her first book. Oh, is it Scud Missiles Blues? Due for release in a few months. So check it out. Be ready for that when it drops. She envisions a world of food and literacy access for everyone, and all her efforts work toward that vision. Welcome, Ahmad. Do you want to say, or kind of just tell folks, show them who you are one more time?
Hello, everybody. My name is Amal Qasir, and my name means hope in Arabic. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you for being here. Sweet. So next, I'm going to read a little bit about Representative Iman Joda, who is a good friend for a very long time. But she is the representative of the Colorado House of Representatives in the 41st District. So Iman is a representative, like I said, of the House for District 41 in Aurora, Colorado. As a first-generation American born to Palestinian immigrants and refugees, she has called Colorado, specifically HD 41, so House District 41, home her entire life. As the first Muslim Arab woman elected to Colorado State Legislature, she is passionate about social justice work and advocates for criminal justice reform, universal health care, fighting the rising costs of healthcare, increasing access to jobs and education, ensuring equal and civil rights for all, and combating our climate crisis. Iman is the founder and executive director of the locally based nonprofit Meet the Middle East, which fosters relationships between the US and the Middle East through education and immersion travel. As the first female spokesperson for the Colorado Muslim Society, the largest and oldest mosque in the Rocky Mountain region, Iman also plays a major role in representing the Muslim community on a variety of social justice areas statewide. She's a former, I cannot read people, community advocate and liaison at the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado. So she was the former advocate and liaison at the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado, where she has spent many years on the front lines during the Colorado legislative session, fighting for progressive legislation, including, but not limited to, repeal of the death penalty, equal pay and equal work, ban the box, family medical leave insurance program, protect Colorado residents from the federal government overreach, sunset continue Civil Rights Division and Commission, repeal exception to constitutional ban on slavery, and in-state tuition for refugees, combat interpreters and other foreign nationals. She is also a proud board member at Ready to Work Aurora and board member emeritus at the Village Exchange Center and the Women's Lobby of Colorado. So she is very, very busy. Iman lectured at the University of Denver's University College Enrichment Program and taught the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from ancient history to today's headlines, as well as life under occupation, a Palestinian perspective in Islam 101. Thank you, Iman. Do you want to wave to the people and say hi to folks?
Hello, friends. I'm incredibly honored and excited to be here with such an amazing panel and lifelong friends as well. I can't wait to get started.
Thank you. Welcome, Representative. And then last but not least, I'm super excited to welcome Karim El-Damanhouri, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Media, Film, and Journalism Studies at DU. And he is also a faculty affiliate at the Center for Middle East Studies. So a little bit about Karim. Karim is an academic and freelance journalist with over a decade of media experience in the Arab world and the US. He is currently an assistant professor at the University of Denver's Medium, Film, and Journalism Studies Department, and a faculty affiliate in the Center for Middle East Studies, and a content producer at CNN International. His research focuses on international and intercultural communication, as well as media and conflict. Much of his work over the past few years has centered on the use of new media and visual communication strategies by violent militant groups in the Arab world. Thank you, Karim. Do you want to say hi to the folks?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. And it's a pleasure to be here. And I like what Amal started earlier. So Karim means generous. Thank you.
I love this. I love this. Well, I am so excited to welcome all of you to this panel and for our hour here today. I know it's going to go fast. So I do have your photos. In a moment here, I'm going to pull them up, but let's actually start in the way that I introduced you all. So let's start with Emma, and then we'll go to Representative Joda, and then we'll come on over to you, Karim. So let's kind of start that way. So in a moment here, I'm going to pull up Emma's photo. But Emma, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of start talking a little bit. But to the collective, the prompt that I gave them that I'll drop in the chat for visuals, people who need the visual, that is me. So I appreciate when people do that. So the opening activity that I gave them, or the prompt, was, I want you to think of home, right? To think of the pieces from your past and present that shape your understanding of what it means to be you, in your Arab identity, in your American identity, and all of the social and personal identities that build your understanding of self. So choose a photo of a place that begins to represent home, a home rooted in your identities. So Emma, we'll start with you, and I'll get your photo up here in just a minute.
So should I go ahead or should I let them see the photo first?
It is so cute when you sent it to me. I was like, yes. Okay, yes. Go on ahead and start explaining it a little bit, or maybe start talking about like what is home to you, and then I'll pull it up in just a second.
I feel like, to answer the question, what is home, I became a poet, and I have been writing on this topic for the past 10 years because I come from two completely different worlds that wove my blood together. My mom is from Iowa and my father is from Syria. And when you see the photo, you'll understand that that dwindling, that combination of cultures is really the only way I have ever understood who I am. I feel like the photo speaks for itself. It's so goofy. But I went to school for 3 years in Syria from 2002 to 2005. It was shortly after September 11th. And my father decided that, we weren't going to learn who we were as Arab American Muslims in the United States. That was so hot. We didn't want to have to learn our identity reactively. He decided we were going to take a proactive approach. We were going to go to Syria. We were going to see for ourselves. We're going to learn the language ourselves. We weren't just going to learn the CNN Allahu Akbar as part of who we were. So my time there in Syria, in the midst of these schools, with my very broken Arabic, that was how I became who I am, the dwindler who could connect with anybody using my Arabic, my English, my etiquette, or whatever it was that I had. And in the photo, you'll see my cool jeans and my awesome shoes were from the United States. And this was the uniform represented all of the private school clothing. They're really fun. So here we are. Look at how big those jeans are. I felt like the coolest American kid. And in this school, there were times when like kids from other buildings across, across the way would come to me through word on the street and be like, hey, my dad just came back from America with this American backpack. Look at it. What do you think about it? And people would come to me all the time telling me about their stories with America. And it was very strange because in one breath you were put on this pedestal, and then in the other breath, we had to be evacuated once when the United States went to bomb Iraq. I believe that was 2003. And it was weird because children looked to me as the American in the class, being like, oh, this is you, this is your fault. So school reminds me of home because that is where I had to battle all aspects of my identity and to figure out who I really was. And I had 4 first days of school in Syria, and I was held back. And all my character was built here. And I love the background here. So I think that should suffice for my answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it's so sweet to see it every time when you sent it, and to hear the stories that come with that too. And even just the negotiating, right? And like having to be that cultural bridge for a lot of reasons. Thank you for sharing pieces of that. Next, I have Representative Iman Joda. So go on ahead, and there's 2 photos. I might like share one for a little bit and then I'll share the other in a moment here. But yeah, let's go on ahead and I'm gonna hand it to you.
Awesome. So Karim and Amal kept with a theme, so I'm going to keep with that theme. Iman means faith in Arabic, and I'm a Ramadan baby, which we are honoring this month. So that's why my parents named me Faith. So the 2 pictures that I sent were actually paintings. And these were paintings that I had seen when I was in Palestine. And they resonate with me for quite a few reasons. I think first is that growing up, I found refuge in drawing and in art, and found a sense of peace when I would express myself through my own drawings and art. And so just like Emma, I think she can relate, right? There's often a sense of comfort and almost being very therapeutic when we express ourselves through our artwork. And so I saw this picture in I believe I saw this one in the walled off hotel. It's a Banksy hotel in Bethlehem, known as the hotel with the worst view in the world because every room looks over the apartheid wall in Palestine. Neda, we went there, if you remember. And this picture to me, not only because it's vibrancy and color, but the celebration that these Palestinian women are enjoying, I think speaks truth to power, that even under occupation and apartheid and oppression, Palestinians still find beauty in our surroundings and in our world and our existence, our heritage, our love and language. And sitting, I think about this and I'm looking at the background, right? There's churches and there's mosques and there's the beautiful architecture of the most, in my mind, one of the most beautiful places on earth. And among the olive trees in our orchards, which is such an integral part of our heritage, that it is really embedded in the Palestinian lifestyle. And, when we think about the word, what makes you think about home? Home can sometimes be relative, right? Just like Emel, I straddled two worlds growing up and I continue to do that. But that to me is a huge privilege. I think about having the ability to be a liaison between one of the most misunderstood regions of the world, the people that call it home, and the people of the United States. And whether that's, sitting in my seat as a representative or teaching in front of the classroom at DU, speaking to those lived experiences, I think is really important. So when I think of home, I think about the reality that I live here, keeping my head up very high with this privilege of being a Palestinian American, practicing Muslim woman of color who speaks Arabic and loves her community, while very much honoring the fact that when you come and hold my identity markers, you inherit generational trauma that gives you a different lens on what home means, what justice and advocacy mean. And you are taught from a very early age that advocacy and justice for your people is not exclusive, but rather when you see injustice, you should always speak up. This next picture to me, I think really speaks to that. The Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem is probably one of my most favorite places on earth. It's so beautiful inside, but there is an olive tree right outside. And the most beautiful place to sit is actually under that olive tree facing the mosque, especially on a Friday during Friday prayers, and just look at its beauty and grandeur. And I find such eloquence in that building. But this picture particularly I look at because I see the woman. I see the woman carrying the weight of Palestine on her back. I heard once that Palestinians fight occupation and apartheid with our wombs, that it is in fact the women who carry the conflict and fight occupation by having more children that they know are at risk of dying at the hands of injustice. And women in particular know that by being mothers, by being daughters and sisters and aunts, we carry a unique responsibility. And I think it's very poignant that God has a chapter in the Quran called Al-Nisa, the woman, right? Granting rights to the woman not granted to women in the West until the 1920s. And I think this reverberates throughout the Muslim and Arab world, but especially in Palestine, knowing that our children are at risk every single day simply because of their identity.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like there's so much power and beauty in what you shared and exactly the way you shared it. So thank you. Thank you for that. And then Kareem, I'm going to hand it to you.
Can you guys imagine the burden of speaking after a super talented poet and a super eloquent representative? It's just like, okay. So the picture that I sent to Neda, it basically, so I wasn't born here. I was born and raised in Egypt. And I first came to the US as an exchange student in 2005, 2004, as a 15-year-old. So I was placed with a host family in Alabama. And when I first landed, my only understanding of the US was basically from two movies, Baby Day Out and Home Alone. So I was walking, I was in the car and trying to search for the skyscrapers in Alabama, and I failed to find them. And it was, as Iman said earlier, it was very hard to sort of like coalesce the two worlds together now that I'm in the US and, being back home. And then I went to a conference in Las Vegas out of, all other places. So I went there, and when I found the pyramid and the Sphinx, it was very interesting to understand. For me, it hit me that yes, identities can coalesce, right? You can find them, working together and actually building towards a greater identity, I guess. So that's why I chose that photo.
I love this. Thank you all for one, engaging in it, and two, like I think there's so much beauty, right? Because I feel like images and what they provoke for us can sometimes speak way more than words can. So to see both of those side by side is really powerful. So thank you all for sharing pieces of you and pieces of home. So with that, I have some questions prepared for our panelists, and then I'm going to save some time at the end for some Q&A. So keep dropping those questions in the Q&As, and then we'll come back to them at the end. So for the panelists, and in no order, like whoever wants to respond to this first, but I'm curious, like I feel like there's so much, and to actually see pieces of those homes, I'm curious for you all, what are things that you see, the sounds that you hear, the smells you engage, and the tastes you think of when you think about what it means to be Arab American? So engaging those five senses, what do you think about, and what does that mean to you when you think about what it means to be Arab American?
I can go first. I recently started cooking as part of my way of life. And I come from the restaurant business. My dad had restaurants growing up, so I never really, I got to enjoy the food, but I never necessarily cooked it myself. And when I started, chopping mint took me so quickly back to Hamouri in Syria, to like the agricultural suburbs of Damascus. And it was so profound. The speed, the like overwhelming engulfing from this one scent. And really fundamentally, it's going to be food in every aspect, from the sound of the kibbeh, the cracked wheat when you break it apart, the chopping on the wooden cutting board, all of these sounds, all of these things. I feel like in Syria, as a family who had farms, the food was essentially the religion of the home. That was how we practiced our way of life. We would sit together to eat meals. We would eat this delicious food. I had 14 aunts and uncles, 13 minus my dad. And these women would take over the kitchen, and you could smell the mint, you could smell the grape leaves, the pickles on their fingers. This was our perfume, this was our identity. And so food, easily, without a doubt, is the thing that connects me most intimately to my Arab roots.
So I guess going off of Iman, since she's speaking about food, and we're in Ramadan, so out of all months. But for me, what I think about an Arab American, which I'm not, I'm just Arab for now, and a few years later I'm gonna be Arab American. But my kids are Arab Americans, so the thing that comes to mind is koshari. And for those of you who don't know koshari, it's an Egyptian food. When I tell you the ingredients here, you're gonna be blown away how they are working together, you know, because you have rice, lentils, macaroni, chickpeas, fried onions, tomato sauce, and you can add even more. But it's beautiful. And same goes with the identity of Arab Americans. When you think of an Arab, it's just not Arab like one blanket and it fits everybody. If you're thinking of, you know, North Africa, you're thinking about the Berber culture and civilization. And if you're thinking about Egypt, then ancient Egypt. If you're thinking about Lebanon, for example, or the Levant, you're thinking about Phoenicians, I never can pronounce it, but you can get the point, Mesopotamia. And so, yeah, I feel like when they come all together, it becomes really beautiful, because also the American aspect is just not, you cannot say an American and it would apply to everywhere in the US. The US is technically a continent. So yeah, koshari.
It's ironic that you asked this, because a couple days ago I was telling my husband one of my strongest memories was when my grandmother and family would come from Palestine. And one of my most favorite things to do when I was a child was rush to their room when they were staying with us, and wait until they would open their suitcase. Because when they would open it, this rush of smells of home would come out, and it was za'atar and sumac and leban and all of these amazing spices that were so authentic to the region would just overwhelm our senses. And I think, you know, I think food is always a huge connection to that. But there's always this moment when I'm in Palestine that is always very much tried to be recreated here. That in front of our home in Palestine, we have a nice fountain underneath the grape leaves. And if you get there early enough in the morning, and we live in Ramallah, so it's a metropolitan city, you know, it's not a small place, and we are in the heart of the city, but you know, we're blessed to have just enough land where there's, you know, we have enough to grow things, and it's private, but you can sit there in the crisp air and feel it on your cheeks and hear the rooster crow in the morning and smell the grapes hanging from the grape leaves, as you have this beautiful spread of za'atar and fresh pressed olive oil and shakshuka and all of these beautiful things that just come together and are this beautiful marriage of, you know, I think these memories, right? But as an Arab American, right, as a Muslim American, let's face it, there's definitely times where those things intersect. So last night for my iftar, when I was breaking my fast, I ordered hot wings, and I'm, you know, so there's definitely that intersectionality that I also very much love.
That's amazing. I was like, throughout all of what you all were sharing, like there's so many beautiful moments or things that I like deeply related to. And then I think there's also so much that's specific to the country or specific to the subculture, depending on where we all came from. And so I'm seeing, you know, there's Syria, there's Egypt, there's Palestine. My family's from Libya, North Africa, not Lebanon, not the same. But, you know, I think it's really important. And, you know, when I think about this question, how I think about that pretty quickly is that I think about the Mediterranean. I think about the salty smell that comes from the sea. Libya is on the Mediterranean, and both of my families come from Tripoli and Benghazi, which are the two main cities, at least in my family. And both of them have really like they're both like on the sea. And I remember just growing up constantly being in that. And even if I'm not physically in the sea swimming, it's always there, especially in Tripoli, in the places that I'm in Tripoli. It's like we're like on the seafront a lot of the time. And so when I think about home, I think about nature. Like I think about the sea, and then I think about the mountains. Literally where I'm at home, I have the hill behind me. So I live on top of Green Mountain in Lakewood, Colorado, land of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and the Ute. And it's really powerful because I literally wake up every day and I see the Table Mesas in Golden. I see the Rocky Mountains right behind me. I have this little hill that I go and hike on. And so I think of, you know, having both the physical mountains as well as the sea as part of my upbringing and who I am. And of course, that context and that grounding in nature, knowing that and what I believe is that is something that God created for us that is way above and beyond what we could explain. So yeah, those are pieces of home for me. But I'm curious to the collective. I'm curious for this panel here. What does it actually mean? So at this point, we've kind of talked about this mix of, you know, having another identity alongside what does it mean to be American, knowing that that is a part of what it means to be American, right? So I'm curious for you all, though, what does it actually mean to you, though, to be American, if you identify as such? But even if you don't, right? Like, just like, what does it mean to be American? And what were you taught, whether that be from schools, communities, media, or other realms? And what does it mean to you now? So there's kind of multiple questions there. So the summary of that is, what does it mean to you to be American? What were you taught from any kind of background? And then what does it mean to you now?
This is such a big question. And it's interesting because when I was growing up, my mom, like I said, is from Iowa. And she is American. When they say go back to your country, that she's on her land. There's nowhere for her to go, right? So although the Arab side of me wanted to identify more with this because of the state of the region, because of the revolutionary spirit that Arabs have, also my connection to Islam. Although I wanted to connect more with that, there was no way that I could neglect the reality that if heaven's under my mother's feet, then my heaven is here in the United States of America. And this land, despite it all, it is where I was born, it is who I am, it is who my mother is. You know, and in a way to honor my mother, I had to really deeply connect with this American identity. But interestingly, when I was about 12, 13 years old, I started to listen to like a lot of Immortal Technique, reading Noam Chomsky, having this very like anti-imperialist view that informed a lot of my understanding of this country, right? And it wasn't until Donald Trump was elected, actually, the night that they declared him the winner of the elections. And I remember I called my father. And I was very worried. It's so strange how worried we were. You know, there was so much hype, there was so much fear around this. And I called my dad and I'm like, Baba, what are we gonna do? And to my surprise, my mom has never said anything like this. To my surprise, my father said, Ahmad, we are Americans. And it is our duty to stay here, and it is our duty to honor this place and to work hard and make it the best place it can be. And it was the first time that I realized how valuable this America is to my immigrant father. We'd never had that official conversation. You know, again, Noam Chomsky was the man who was teaching me all about America, which you're going to get a very interesting view of that. But when my father said this, I had to sort of step back and really embrace the American identity, not just as this place that my mom's from, but that as this place that allowed my father to become the businessman that he is. This place that if it weren't for America, my father would be in Syria. And we've lost 49 members of my family in that war. There's no way to even guarantee that my father could have lived through that. This place is haven, this place is safety, this place offered us our academics, our intellect, our ability to change a lot of the world. And of course, I'm always going to be at war with this. with this, the military industrial complex that's touching every corner of this earth, that's hurting people around the world. But the fact of the matter is we have been given America as a blessing, more so than it is the test. And it took me many, many, many years to come to this conclusion, but it was speaking to my father on the election night that really allowed me to reinterpret my understanding of America. Thank you.
Keeping with that theme, the day after Trump was elected, I was brushing my teeth and I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, I need to prepare to buy 2 one-way tickets for my mother and I to go live in Palestine. That's how unsafe I felt. And my father had passed away about 4 months earlier, and I completely felt responsible for her. And, I didn't leave because I felt called for a greater purpose, which I think many of us felt called to. 6 months later, when I told that story to a friend, he said, I find it curious that you thought it would be better for you to go live under occupation and apartheid rather than live in the United States as an American citizen. And I never looked at it that way. I looked at it as pure survival and protection of my family. Now, the course of those next 4 years really set the tone for shifting the tides and pivoting, redefining, reimagining what advocacy looked like. It birthed the Me Too movement. It birthed Black Lives Matter. It birthed, a lot of things came out of those 4 years. And there are some very unfortunate truths that were always there, but I think that administration brought them to the forefront, compounded with a pandemic that revealed there are true epidemics in our society that are rooted in systemic racism. And so, when I think about what does it mean to be an American, for me, it's about that American dream, right? My parents came here because they were not afforded the same things they were able to give their children in their own homeland. And, the American dream for me is not some trite or cliche phrase, because I am the product of that American dream. And I think every single one of us has the opportunity to define our own American dream. But when we are faced with the violation of our own civil rights and our own rights to choose for ourselves, then that American dream becomes at risk. And I don't want to call it a nightmare, because I don't think that's what it is. And, I think that there is a sea change happening in this country, and we are going through our dark ages, but we will emerge into a renaissance that will truly be a reflection of what we want to be and have a reflection of our democratic values. So when I think about this question, what does it mean to be an American to me? It means that even after 300 years, 400 years of systemic racism and colonialism and imperialism, and yes, our very twisted, fear mongering and war complex, that even after all of that, a Palestinian American woman can stand up and take an oath to defend this Constitution and represent Colorado.
So, so from the perspective of an Egyptian young man watching the media and the movies, two things came in mind when I was outside the US. One is American as white. So it was being portrayed sort of like as a monocolor kind of thing, or a mono ethnicity. The other thing was the superhero, which was tied to the color as well. Growing up, I wasn't seeing like superheroes other than just white. From the news side, it was mainly related to what Iman was mentioning, you know, seeing American troops laying foot in, you know, countries around us, basically. When I came here, I started hearing about the American dream, and one of the main things that, you know, dawned on me when I came here, I was in high school in Alabama. One is that the U.S. is like very multi-ethnic, very multiracial. You know, it's not as the movies would usually portray it, and that the people in the U.S. are not necessarily, you know, on board with what the US administration or military may be doing in a certain place or a certain region. And my kids are a testament to that, right? They are Americans. They are half Egyptian. They are Egyptians, Jordanians, Mediterranean, Muslims, North African, but also Southwestern Asian. So it's like, you know, a mishmash. And basically, I still believe in the American dream. It's just it's not as two-dimensional as I used to see it or hear about it. There are a lot of struggles. There's a lot of, you know, challenges. For me now, an American is a very hardworking person who is operating within, but also struggling against a very materialistic, you know, capitalistic system that challenges certain groups of people more than others. Yeah, this is for me what is an American now after seeing it from the outside and then being in the inside.
It's really beautiful, you all. Thank you so much for continuing to show up and continuing to share and really diversify and like complicate, right? Like deeply complicating. What does it mean? And how do we learn that, and asking ourselves and actually answering that, right? Not just asking how did we get here, but actually answering some of those pieces. So thank you all for doing that. For the next part, so looking at time, I want to save a little bit of time for the Q&As, but I have a couple questions I would love to get to. So with that being said, initial thoughts, kind of first reactions is what I'm looking for with these. Not like rapid fire round, like we're not going to do that per se, but I would love your quick answers to these two. So this one you can spend maybe a little bit of time on, but being conscious of that. So many folks with hyphenated identities often live in hybrid spaces, and hyphenated identities could be like how to American, so on and so forth, right? You name that, there's many, but we often live in hybrid spaces. So we tend to have the best of both worlds, but we also have their baggage. But with that can come new traditions that we create. So the question to you all is, so do you have any traditions that kind of bring your worlds together in a unique way that you've kind of shaped from all of the pieces that we shared with us today and more?
I think just right off the bat, my poetry is the tradition that has been created. In my poetry, I can infuse, you know, baklava and apple pie, you know, all on the same place. And this is the empirical evidence that our children will be able to read of how it felt like to have these multiple cultures, to have Arabic infused into the English poems, you know. This is the best example. I'm married to a Pakistani guy, so I'm gonna go back to food one more time, but like the diversity of spices that I now have as an American with my salt and pepper, with an Arab with, you know, my cardamom, my caraway, all of those, and then, you know, with the desi with my chili spices and everything. I think this is a testimony to the traditions in our food that we're making.
I think about the day I was sworn into office. You know, I raised my right hand and I was wearing this mask. And this mask has Palestinian embroidery on it. And, you know, just like in those pictures, this speaks to my heritage, to my traditions. But it also, being able to raise my right hand and swear an oath to my Constitution speaks to my American culture as well. And so I was very proud to wear this, being sworn in as a Palestinian Muslim, to our state house.
So on my end, really quick, it revolves around the holidays and how we celebrate it. So usually my wife and I, when we are celebrating Ramadan or Eid and stuff like that, we basically cook traditional food, and we start, actually giving that food to friends of ours and having them taste it, so that we feel like, we're they are celebrating with us, and vice versa as well. When we're invited, let's say, to a Thanksgiving dinner or something, and we try to bring something also from our culture, and bringing both together on the table. This, I would say, is one of the traditions.
So good, y'all. So good. And the last question I have for you all is, what is one thing you wish people knew about Arab Americans? Technically, it's a two-part question. So that's the first part, is what is one thing you wish people knew about Arab Americans? And then what is one hope you have for people as we wrap up here today?
I wish people knew how much the Arab laughs, how much he jokes, what are like uncles in the back room playing backgammon can look like. We're only being depicted as these political entities on the news, and there's so much more color to us. And part two is, what is one hope? I really hope you will go into an Arabic restaurant if you haven't already. I really hope you will sit down and eat that food. Man, straight up, we used to have people who would come into my restaurant, like men straight up who would tell me, like, I don't like your people, but I like your hummus. I'm like, all right, brother, have a seat at table 6, coming right up. And food is powerful. If you knew how delicious we cooked, you'd question everything that, the media sometimes depicts about us. Yeah.
I wish that people had a better understanding of how empowered women are in our culture, and that there is a reason why 14 Muslim women have been democratically elected in the Muslim world. And we took till 2020 to get our first woman to the executive branch, and not even to the presidency yet. And we are often viewed as primitive, right, as backwards, when in fact, I think it's very much quite the opposite. I would also hope that people understand that we are not boxes to be checked. When we sit in rooms, we sit in our power, and we sit there to influence the discussion, not so you can say there was a person of color, there was a Muslim, or there was an Arab. We are not a box to be checked. We are not a commodity that is to be dealt with. We have ideas, thoughts, and we have contributed to this globe and our history in immense ways that our society depends on today. I think another hope is that people realize that we have more in common than not. I watch the Broncos, and I go fly fishing, and I like to do things that everyone else likes to do for the most part. Obviously we're not a monolith, but yes, just because I have these identity markers doesn't mean that we can't find many things in common.
I mean, if there's one thing I would tell an American about an Arab American, is that they are no less American than you are, simply put. And this is what I tell my kids: you are an American. And the hope, pulling from my work and my area of expertise in media and journalism, etc., it would be to not just Arab Americans and not just Arabs, but all persons of color, basically, indigenous communities, African Americans, Asian Americans, etc., you name it, representation in the media, to have a more accurate representation, and not just limit the portrayal of certain group of people to to a certain image. And on my end, what I'm actually working on, I'm still working on a project that I'm starting to use my own skills to do that within the scope of Colorado. So what I'm doing is reaching out to, Muslims, Americans, immigrant communities, persons of color, and basically wanting to interview them and get out their stories, their inspiring stories, to shatter the stereotypes that are embedded here. And I hope I can interview my fellow panelists at some point. It will be an honor. And if anybody in the attendees also, if they have like certain stories they would want to flag, I'm going to type my email here. Please flag them to me. This is what I'm trying to do. This is my main project that I'm working on lately. So.
That is amazing. That's amazing. So maybe we have a couple of questions in the chat, but before we get to them, I would actually love, how can people find you all? Like, so we hear from Kareem a few ways that we can, what you're working on, kind of what's coming up for you and how to find you. How else can we find y'all? What are you working on?
I am working on a book about Syria, and that should be coming out in the next few months, inshallah. It's as the conflict has transformed, so the book has had to follow. But I am on Instagram a lot. I do daily things. We have a global community that we have built of writers from all over the world. So I'm a poet.
All my handles are Iman for Colorado. So, follow me, find me. And yeah, you can contact me through that. What am I working on? Trying to get housing as a human right and get healthcare to Coloradans. I just established the Office of New Americans here in Colorado. And so really fighting for legislation that is a true breath and reflection of the values that I truly believe in through my own lived experiences.
Love this. I love this. And sometimes I wish like we were in person, because my reactions on this side, y'all, are really great, but I'm on mute, so you can't hear them all. So instead, just know that I am like deeply feeling it. And multiple times in the call, you've made me sit back in my chair. So just really, really appreciate the skill, the talent, the knowledge, the scope, the perspectives, and the brilliance that you all bring to this space. So we'll wrap up with a couple of questions from the audience, and then I'll hand it to Linnea to officially close this out. So there's a couple of really interesting ones in here. I think this one might be a little bit quicker to answer, but how does the Hadab experience differ from the Muslim experience, knowing that they're not the same? So I'm curious, like what you would say to that. How would you respond to that?
I feel like, this is a very interesting question, because yes, there is a separation. Only 19% of the 2 billion Muslims in the world are Arab, and we are in the minority, right? The lens that I bring, however, as a Palestinian, is that when you are in Palestine, Christian Palestinians and Christian Muslims do not differentiate from each other. We are both occupied. We are both under occupation, oppressed, and living under apartheid. And so our collective, lifestyle is not separated by our faith. And I think one of the most beautiful examples of that is a story my father told me once. He said, Iman, during Ramadan, our Christian neighbors would open their windows to hear the recitation of the Quran. And during Christmas and Easter, their Muslim neighbors would take gifts to our Christian neighbors. And so there's a very beautiful marriage of our cultures, because that is what, in fact, we do share, but just practice our faiths differently.
I think that also Islam is very, it's racialized. Like when you think Muslim, you think Arab, when that really is not very accurate at all. And so I think that there is an assumption that all Arabs are Muslims, all Muslims are Arabs, and we have to debunk that, because just as Iman said, there is an entire group of people who beautifully color the diversity of the Arab regions. In Syria, we had the city of Ma'lula, which is the only city in the world that still speaks Aramaic, the language of Jesus. And it is such a holy, gorgeous place. And so, yeah, I think Islam versus Muslim, although of course they intersect heavily, we have to change our idea that they're only one thing, that they're the same thing.
Yeah, just very quickly, I would echo what was just mentioned, and just add that, Arabs can be Muslims, can be Christians, can even be Jews, and that not everybody living in an Arab country is necessarily Arab. So there is the Amazigh community, there is the Kurds, there is the Turkoman, etc. So I look at, Arab and Muslim as, two layers that add up to one another, in the very same way as there is a sizable, relatively speaking, sizable African American Muslim community here. So they have there is a cultural component coming from the experience of an African American plus being Muslim. Same with Indonesia, Indonesian culture plus Muslim, Afghani, Pakistani, all over the world. So yeah.
Like mute on, mute off. This is the part where I always get torn, because I'm like, can we maybe hear from one person? I know, Linnea, I'm pushing it. Can we hear from maybe one person to talk about this last question? Because I think it's really important, and especially talking about Indigenous peoples. So the question is, how do you see Arab Americans support Indigenous people of the Southwestern US?
I'll take that. Listen, the realities of many Arabs around the world, but I will speak personally as a Palestinian, there is literally zero difference between the treatment of our Indigenous brothers and sisters in the United States and the Palestinians in Palestine. We are forced to live on the equivalent of reservations behind walls. We are stuffed in cages. We are held without due process. All of the things, we are forced to carry different color IDs. We are labeled, we were stripped of voting rights, and we were pushed out of our lands. And so the Indigenous narrative is very much the narrative of the Palestinian people. And unfortunately, when you have a colonizing blueprint, that blueprint is applicable anywhere in the world. It's just pick your victim. And for the Indigenous people and for Palestinians, we share that kinship in that unfortunate reality.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. So as we wrap up here today, thank you all for joining us. I also am going to drop a link in the chat because I get this question often, as far as what's the difference between Arab, Arabian, and Arabic. There is a very big difference. Please don't call people Arabian. That's for horses, for Arabian horses. And so other than that, check out that resource, and I'll officially hand it back to Linnea. But before I do, thank you, panelists, for everything that you've shared with us today. And it is so beautiful to see your faces. And Ramadan Mubarak to all of you.
Thank you all so much. I have just put a couple of resources in the chat that you can take a look at. And from C+V and Heritage Months, we just want to make sure everyone has this on your radar for next week, Living and Learning on the Spectrum, a conversation on the evolution of autism and neurodiverse advocacy. So we will be continuing the conversation. Thank you so much, everyone.